All right, let's talk about something we've all felt, that deeply frustrating, almost baffling human question: why do we keep making the same mistakes, even when we absolutely know better? Let's get into it. You know the feeling, right? Whether it's in your relationships, your job, or just life, it can feel like you're caught in this bizarre loop. You mess up, you feel bad about it, you swear you've learned your lesson, and then boom, you're right back in the same spot. It's a universal feeling, and today we're going to figure out exactly why it happens. You know, Karl Marx really nailed something here. The first time a mistake happens, sure, it can be a total disaster, a tragedy. But when it happens again, when it could have and should have been avoided, well, then it just starts to feel like a joke, right? A farce. This quote is the perfect frame for the mystery we're about to unravel, because this isn't just about you and me. It's a pattern baked into human history. So our first clue is actually hiding in plain sight, right in the pages of history books. We're about to see how, even though the names and the places change, the basic human errors, the actual ingredients of our biggest mistakes, stay weirdly, and sometimes spookily, the same. And this is the key, captured so perfectly by Mark Twain. It's not that the exact same events are on a constant replay. It's more about the patterns, the echoes. The rhymes he's talking about, those are the deep human drivers that just don't seem to go away. Things like raw ambition, blinding hatred, and just good old-fashioned greed. Okay, this slide just lays it out so clearly. Look at unchecked ambition. You've got Kaiser Wilhelm II, and then, a few decades later, Hitler. Both were driven by this intense need for a dominant German empire, and both dragged the world into a devastating war. It rhymes. Or how about oppression? King Louis XVI in France, Tsar Nicholas II in Russia. Different centuries, different countries, same story. They ruled with an iron fist, ignored the people, and pushed them right to the edge of a violent revolution. And then, the most tragic rhyme of all, mass hatred. The anti-Semitism that fueled the Holocaust, and the tribal hatred that ignited the Rwandan genocide. I mean, the context is different, but the horrific outcome of weaponized hate is the same. The costumes change, but the mistakes rhyme. So, we've seen this play out on the world stage. But to really get to the bottom of the why, we have to zoom in, way in. We have to go from the scale of history to the intimate, messy world inside our own heads. So Sigmund Freud came up with this idea, and it is a total game changer for understanding this whole mess. It's called repetition compulsion. Basically, it's our unconscious mind trying to fix something that broke in the past by making us live through it again. It's like your brain is a movie director who's obsessed with reshooting a terrible scene over and over and over, desperately hoping that this time they'll finally get a happy ending. Now, that might sound a little abstract, I get it. So let's make it incredibly real with the story of a woman named Beth. Her own parents were traumatized orphans, and that unresolved pain created a pattern that would tragically shape Beth's entire life, locking her into a cycle of repeating one very specific, devastating mistake. So think of your nervous system as having three basic gears. Safety is your first gear. That's when you're calm, cool, connected. Danger is second gear. Your fight or flight mode kicks in. And life threat is third gear. That's the deepest level, where you just freeze or shut down. For Beth, constant neglect as a child and then the sudden death of her father, that wasn't just sad. It was a seismic event. It slammed her nervous system straight into the life threat gear and essentially hardwired a pattern of fear and loss deep into her being. And here's the wild part. This isn't just a bad memory she's dealing with. That trauma physically rewired parts of her brain, especially the bits that handle fear and memory, like the amygdala and hippocampus. So what happened? Because of this rewiring, every single October, right around the anniversary of her father's death, her brain would unconsciously force a reenactment of that original loss. And how did it do it? She would break up with whoever she was dating, reliving the loss year after year without even consciously knowing why she was doing it. Okay, so repetition compulsion is a really powerful force, and it's often tied to some deep trauma. But what about the rest of us? What about our smaller, everyday mistakes? Well, a lot of the time, those are guided by a different kind of programming, the mental shortcuts our brain loves to take. Yeah, we're talking about cognitive biases. Think of them like bugs in your brain's operating system. Confirmation bias, that makes you look for proof that you're already right. The sunk cost fallacy, that's the voice that tells you to keep pouring money into a failing business just because you've already spent so much. Availability bias makes the most recent, dramatic thing you heard seem like the most important fact in the world. And overconfidence, well, that one's pretty self-explanatory. These shortcuts help us think fast, but man, do they make it hard to see when we're wrong. And this is exactly how those mistakes get wired in and become habits. It's a four-step process. First, something triggers you, and you make a choice, even a bad one. Second, your brain might release a little hit of dopamine, the feel-good chemical, which acts as a temporary reward. Third, that reward strengthens the brain pathway, connecting the trigger to the action. You do that enough times. And fourth, that behavior becomes automatic. It's the brain's default setting, especially when you're stressed. The mistake becomes the path of least resistance. So we've got the historical patterns, we've got the psychology, we've got the brain science. But what happens when these little human flaws play out on a massive corporate scale? Well, the consequences can be absolutely spectacular failures. Kodak. This is the ultimate cautionary tale. In 1975, a Kodak engineer invented the digital camera. They literally held the future in their hands. But the executives, they were trapped by confirmation bias. They were a film company, and all they could see was how this new invention would hurt their film sales. So they buried it. They repeated the mistake of protecting yesterday's profits instead of building tomorrow's, until eventually, in 2012, they went bankrupt. And honestly, it's a shockingly common story. Toys R Us basically handed its entire online business over to Amazon, its biggest competitor. Sears killed its world-famous catalog right when e-commerce was about to explode. And Borders Books? They made the exact same fatal error as Toys R Us. These weren't just one-off bad decisions. They were a pattern of refusing to see the future, and it led all of them straight to collapse. Okay, so we have thoroughly diagnosed the problem. We've seen how history, our own minds, and even huge companies show us why we get stuck. So now, for the most important question of all, how do we get out? How do we actually break the cycle for ourselves? Well, here it is, your practical toolkit. First, you have to become a detective of your own life. Journaling, just writing things down, can help you spot the patterns. Second, your goals need to be crystal clear. Not all do better, but when this specific thing happens, I will do this specific thing instead. Third, mindfulness. It sounds simple, but creating that tiny pause between feeling an impulse and acting on it is a superpower. Fourth, get an outside opinion. We are often the last people to see our own patterns. And finally, and this one might be the biggest of all, you have to totally change how you think about failure. Because look, it all comes down to this. With a fixed mindset, every mistake feels like a final grade, a judgment that says you're not good enough. It makes you want to run from challenges. But with a growth mindset, failure isn't a verdict. It's just data. It's a lesson. It's an opportunity to learn something new, adjust your approach, and get better. A growth mindset turns a mistake from a brick wall into a stepping stone. And that's where we'll leave it. We've seen that repeating our mistakes isn't some deep personal flaw. It's a profoundly human pattern, woven into our history and hardwired into our brains. But we've also seen that the pattern isn't our destiny. So I'll just leave you with this to chew on. What's the one rhyme you're tired of hearing in your own story? What is the one mistake you're ready to stop repeating and start learning from today?